Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a nutrient that I think causes a little bit of confusion in the aquarium hobby, and that is iron. And you might have heard things like iron makes plants redder. But today we're going to discuss what iron actually is, what it's doing in your tank, what forms it exists in, how the pH actually affects it, and if it really does make plants redder. So let's break it down properly from the basics to the actual science behind it and what's happening in your aquarium. So what is iron and why do plants need it? So iron is a chemical element and it's an essential micronutrient, and plants only need very small amounts of it, but without it they can't function properly. So iron is critical for things like chlorophyll production, energy transfer systems and enzyme activity within the plant. And without iron, plants can't produce chlorophyll, and when they don't produce chlorophyll or they don't produce enough chlorophyll, they don't photosynthesize as effectively. So iron isn't optional, it's something that's definitely fundamental to the health of your aquarium plants. So it helps things like the green coloration in terms of like chlorophyll. It's important for healthy growth and it's important for energy production. But here's where things get quite interesting with iron, because iron behaves very differently in water compared to a lot of other nutrients. So in the aquarium, iron mainly exists in two chemical forms. So you have Fe2+, which is ferrous iron, and Fe3+, which is ferric iron. Now, ferrous iron, Fe2+, is the reduced form, and it's the form that plants can most readily absorb. So it's their preferred way of getting iron. Whereas ferric iron, Fe3+, is the oxidized version. So in oxygen-rich water, like in your aquarium, ferrous iron becomes ferric iron, and plants can't take that up as easily, and it essentially drops out of the water column, meaning that it's no longer dissolved in the water and plants can't take it up. So because your aquarium is full of oxygen, it should have oxygen in it, oxygen rapidly converts Fe2 into Fe3. When that happens, iron forms insoluble compounds, and as we said, it sort of like drops out of the water column. So in simple terms, you add iron and it disappears before the plants can even really use it. And that's why we don't generally dose just plain iron into our aquariums. So if you've ever looked at a fertilizer, like just an iron fertilizer, you might see some different things on there. And one of those things might be chelated iron. So to stop iron from immediately oxidizing when it goes into the water and precipitating, some fertilizing brands use something called chelation, and a chelate is an organic molecule that binds the iron ion and protects it. So if you think of it like this protective bubble around the iron atom, the chelate basically slows down oxygenation, it keeps the iron dissolved in the water column for longer, and therefore it allows plants to absorb it. So it's kind of like delaying that effect of oxidization, stopping it turning into Fe3+. So when you see chelated iron on a fertilizer bottle, it means that the iron is chemically stabilized and it can remain available in the water column. So next we're going to talk about why your pH matters. So this is where the chemistry sort of really comes into it. So iron solubility is heavily influenced by the pH of your water. So as your pH increases, iron becomes less soluble, ferric iron forms faster, the precipitation happens more quickly, or it drops out of the water column more quickly, and just the overall availability of iron to your plants is just massively reduced. So when we talk about iron in aquariums, what we're really talking about is how stable the different forms of iron are at different pH levels. So ferrous iron, Fe2, is soluble, it's easily absorbed, it's what plants prefer, but it's only really truly stable in sort of neutral or acidic water. So as the pH rises, iron, or Fe2+, it oxidizes quicker into Fe3, which is far less soluble. So that's why in higher pH aquariums, iron can actually be present and it can show up on an iron test. but it's not actually available to the plants and the plants aren't taking it up. And all of that is to say that there are different chelates for different reasons. So it's a different sort of bonding agent. So you might have seen these again on bottles of fertilizer. You have DTPA, and that's stable generally around 7 to 7.5 pH. And EDDHA, which is stable even above a pH of 8. So if you have like a really alkaline tank, the DTPA-based iron would drop out too quickly, whereas EDDHA is more soluble in your sort of higher pH ranges. And then you've got some brands like Fe², for example, they use iron gluconate, and some other brands use other different compound complexes. And they, again, make it more readily available long-term for the plants. So if your iron source doesn't match your tank's pH, your plants can show deficiency even if you're dosing regularly. So it just pays to get a good quality fertiliser, good quality iron, and just know what its sort of bonding agents are, its chemical compounds are, in order to ensure that you're providing your plants with the right forms of iron, basically. So I use Fe² because Fe² use a gluconate and it just makes it more readily available for longer, and it works in a range of pHs. There'll be other brands out there that do a similar thing, but they are just some things to look out for if you are shopping for an iron fertiliser. Now, a really crucial thing about iron is that iron is immobile inside plants, meaning that if a plant starts running short of iron, it can't move iron about. It can't move it from an old leaf to a new leaf. So deficiency will always show up in new growth first. So that's sort of your first alarm bell for an iron deficiency, is if the new leaves don't look great. But yeah, just some sort of classic signs is that the new leaves are pale or yellow. The veins of the plants remain like quite green, but the rest of the plant still looks like pretty unhealthy and pretty pale. There's slow growth and it just has like an overall washed out appearance and just doesn't look healthy. So if only the new growth is pale, that is your sign that you should probably look at dosing additional iron. So to answer the question, does iron make red plants redder? Well, this is partly myth and partly just a bit of a misunderstanding. So iron doesn't directly create the red pigment. In fact, the red coloration in aquarium plants comes from something called anthocyanins, not iron. And I do have a video on this called Nitrate Limitation, which talks about anthocyanins. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, you can check out that video. But basically, in short, anthocyanins are produced when the light intensity is high and if the plant's genetic allows it, and some level of controlled stress can promote it as well. And just if the growth conditions are optimal, you will notice red coloration in your plant. So iron allows the plant to stay healthy enough in order to express its colour, but it doesn't directly create the red pigment. And if a plant is deficient, correcting iron, or the amount of iron available to the plant, can definitely improve the colour of your plant, but once the iron levels are sufficient, adding more isn't going to make your red plants any redder. Light and genetics drive red coloration, not excess iron. So how much iron should you dose? Well, for most planted aquariums, a target range of sort of 0.05 to 0.2 parts per million would be all that plants really need. But your best practice is to dose small amounts, dose consistently, and avoid large spikes. So for example, 0.05 mil 2 or 3 times a week, or very, very low daily dosing is always going to be better than like random big dumps into your aquarium. So iron is used quickly, it's oxidized quickly, or it's bound in the system. So consistency beats, as I say, putting loads in at once. Now, me personally, I don't really dose iron separately. I've not ever really found the need to. And a lot of the fertilizers that I use or sort of have in rotation, some of them are like an all-in-one, which contains small amounts of iron anyway, which is usually enough to sort of sustain all of the tanks that I have. But if I was using, say, for example, a fertilization routine that didn't have any iron in it, then yes, I might add a little bit additionally, But because I use an all-in-one plus some separate dosing just to bring those levels up, I don't actually dose iron by itself. And there's another reason for that, which we'll talk about in a second. But one thing to bear in mind when dosing iron is something called iron toxicity, or just basically overdosing iron, because more is definitely not better. And excess iron can contribute to algae and obviously nutrient imbalances and certain buildups of iron, which can then lock out and stop other nutrients from working in the water column. And it can also stress out some species, especially sensitive livestock such as shrimp. And some delicate plants react poorly to heavy iron levels. For example, one that comes to mind is Riccardia camidrifolia, can be quite sensitive in unstable conditions and can start going brown. So iron is essential, but balance is everything. And yeah, just definitely don't overdose it because it could have like an adverse effect. So when I mentioned earlier about the reason why I don't just dose straight iron, it is because of something called iron redox cycling. And throughout this video, when I've said things like iron precipitates or it drops out of the water column, iron doesn't just vanish when it leaves the water column. It obviously has to go somewhere. So when iron oxidizes into its ferric form, Fe3+, it binds to your substrate, like your clay-based substrate and organic matter, and just sort of anything in your substrate layer, that's where it can sort of bind itself to. So over time, your substrate basically becomes a big reservoir of stored iron, and even some other nutrients as well. And deep in your substrate level, especially if you slope your tank up at the back, so you've got like a deep part of your substrate level, the oxygen levels are a lot lower there, and bacteria in these zones convert ferric iron, Fe3+, back into ferrous iron, Fe2+. And that back and forth process of converting and reconverting is called iron redox cycling. So your substrate is consistently locking away iron and then slowly releasing it again near your plant roots. And that's one reason why mature aquariums and very healthy substrate systems often grow plants like really, really well, even with relatively low water column dosing. And I guess it's kind of similar if you're familiar with the nitrogen cycle and nitrifying and denitrifying bacteria, where they convert and convert it back. It's kind of similar to that, and that's sort of like the best way that I can explain it. So your substrate system is doing a lot more than you realise behind the scenes sometimes. So what is all this to say? Well, it's basically to say that, of course, iron is essential, and plants primarily absorb iron in the ferrous form. Oxygen and pH levels can determine your iron stability. Chelates keep iron available, or other organic binding compounds. Iron doesn't make plants red, light does, and you should always dose small, consistent and balanced amounts. Iron is a micronutrient, but understanding it makes a massive difference in the success of your planted tank. So if this has helped you, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. It really helps me out, really helps the channel in order to make more videos. And this is going to be part of a series. So this is just episode 1 of, I think it's going to be 8 or 9 parts, where basically we talk about each individual nutrient in depth in order to help you get a better understanding of what is actually going on when you're putting these things in your aquarium, because it's easy to just stand there and dose it, but I sometimes think it makes things a little bit easier if you kind of have a better understanding of what is actually going on. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time for another episode.